Jonathan Lemire's excellent new book, The Big Lie, came out yesterday. We've been talking all week about it on Morning Joe. And Jonathan, as I saw that news cross yesterday, you had Donald Trump back in Washington for the first time since he left back in January of 2021. And also this breaking story from the Washington Post that the Department of Justice is, in fact, focused now on Donald Trump. It all dovetails with your book and what we're seeing from the January 6th committee, which is to say that this was a premeditated effort, that this was not a spontaneous rally on January 6th, and that the big lie was cooked up and concocted for years, as you report in the book, but especially heightened in the months leading up to the election. In September of 2020, you point out the president said at a press briefing, "We're going to have to see what happens," when asked if he would commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, Willie, thank you for that. And we've talked about earlier in the week how, in some ways, the seeds of the big lie were planted way back in 2016, but it obviously accelerated in 2020. It's useful, as the book details, to just reflect back to where things stood at the end of February in 2020. That last week of February, then President Trump was heading to India for a trip that was long on pageantry and short on substance. And he began that week thinking that he was going to run for re-election. He had just been acquitted from his first impeachment trial. His approval ratings were up. He thought he was going to run for re-election on the back of a strong economy and potentially run against the socialists, because at that point, Bernie Sanders had done well in the early Democratic primaries. But as the book details with some new behind-the-scenes reporting, it all fell apart that week. It was there in India where he had to address the ravages of the coronavirus pandemic. For the first time, the impact it was having on the economy. Wall Street fell over 1,000 points in a day. And by the end of that week, Joe Biden had won the South Carolina primary. So suddenly he was going to be facing a much more moderate Democratic challenger. So his two main arguments for re-election vanished. And as the year went on, and he pointed to mail-in ballots in particular as a potential source of voter fraud, and it just picked up and up and up. And he had the Republican Party and the conservative media going along with it, amplifying his lies, heading into election night where he declared he won when he didn't. And then we saw what happened in the following 2 months before January 6th.
You know, you sent me an early copy of the book, and I love it. And one of the things that struck me was it's not just about the 2020 election. The big lie is something, Mike said it earlier, are we in unprecedented times? The big lie has become a political philosophy that has divided America in half. Those who believe in it and those who don't. Pretty much along party lines, but not totally, as we saw Pence and that dueling speech do. How much is this about not just the 2020 election, but people who believe in democracy versus a new authoritarian approach?
Yeah, in many ways, it's the defining issue of our time in terms of our politics. Of course, there are news of the day concerns like inflation and certainly existential issues like Roe v. Wade or the war in Ukraine. But right now, the big lie, whether you believe it or not, is, first of all, a dividing line in the Republican Party. And there are very few on the side of those who don't believe the big lie, or at least aren't willing to go along with it. And we're seeing that here. It's a litmus test for Republicans. And certainly, if you want former President Trump's support, you better have fealty to the big lie. And then there's the other side, Democrats and a handful of Republicans who are concerned that the big lie has challenged the very fabric of our democracy and that it puts at risk fair and free elections this midterms and particularly in 2024.
You know, Jonathan, there are so many different newsy nuggets in your book, The Big Lie. One of the most interesting, at least to me, was in Helsinki. In 2018, Fiona Hill, apparently, allegedly, almost faked a heart attack in order to get the focus off what Donald Trump was doing internally, alone with Vladimir Putin, faking a heart attack. That sounds like something I would do to get out of appearing with you at the 92nd Street Y tonight, but I'm not going to do that. But that nugget alone is a tease for all the other little newsy nuggets that you've incorporated into this book.
Yeah, I've alerted the staff at the venue tonight to have paramedics on hand so you can call out your bluff if you do try to fake a heart attack tonight. But Fiona Hill, who a lot of us got to know during the impeachment trial, and we've seen her speak on shows like this and elsewhere about what a danger Donald Trump was, but she was in the administration in part to try to rein in Trump's impulses towards Russia. And Helsinki, which became, of course, this infamous news conference, I was part of it and asked a question of Trump there, who he believed. whether he believed the conclusions of every U.S. intelligence agency that Russia had interfered with the 2016 election on his behalf, or whether he believed Putin's denials. And he made it very clear he sided with Moscow. And Fiona Hill tells me in the book, and thank you for the tease, Mike, that yes, in order to try to just simply get Trump to stop talking, she considered faking a coronary. She didn't do that, but she has since expressed publicly just how disturbed she was by Trump's behavior towards Putin.
And anyone who knows how calm and collected Fiona Hill is would realize what an extraordinary thing that is, that she even had to think about doing that. Jonathan, I mean, you covered Trump all through his presidency. You covered this period, of course, on a daily basis. So when you were doing the research for the book, what was it that still surprised you? What struck you most that you hadn't really anticipated in your research?
Reflecting back upon it, it's just the sheer volume and ferocity of his willingness to lie. That there was nothing, no matter too big or too small, for him to do it, to try to gain that tactical advantage. And Steve Bannon is quoted in the book telling aides, saying that even he, who is not a, shall we say, adherent to the truth at all times, even he was flummoxed by the idea that Trump would lie about everything. And therefore, the White House staff would have to scramble to try to cover for that, to try to justify his lie, sometimes even to try to fake things to prove that Trump had been right all along. And I think that it was connecting the dots about how lies that some of them even seemed harmless, like lying about the crowd size inauguration, but how that primed those around him to go along with when he would tell bigger lies, and none bigger, of course, than those about the election, a lie that fueled the violence of January 6th and still both political parties are grappling with today.
And now out even as recently as yesterday, positioning himself as a martyr, a victim of all these investigations into what he so clearly did on January 6th. Now, the book is excellent. If you want to see more of that crackling chemistry between Barnacle and Lemire, you can see it tonight at the 92nd Street Y in New York, one of the great venues in New York City or anywhere. It's sold out, we're being told. Maybe there's scalpers, maybe you can get on StubHub, I don't know. But Barnacle will be there, Lemire will be there talking about The Big Lie at the 92nd Street Y. That's at 7 o'clock tonight. Such a great place to host a conversation, and two of the best doing it, assuming Barnacle shows up, which remains a long shot at this late hour.